Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast where a behavioral scientist examines what it's like to live a humorous life. Glimpse into the lives of the funniest people in entertainment, business, and science as your host, Dr. Peter McGraw, explores their habits, motivations, and secrets to success. Get ready to fire up your brain and your funny bone. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast that looks at the lives of funny people. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Shane Mauss. Shane is a stand-up comedian. He has appeared on Conan and Jimmy Kimmel. He has a Netflix special and headlines on shows all over the world. More interestingly, Shane does comedy about science. He hosts the podcast Here We Are, where he interviews scientists about their work. He's the subject of the documentary film Psychonautics, which is a comedic exploration of psychedelics. He is currently touring as the host and creator of Stand Up Science, which is part comedy show and part TED event. Welcome, Shane.
Oh, thank you for having me, Peter McGraw. First of all, you forgot to mention that we're very good friends that know each other. Quite such a formal introduction. One, I loved it because I sound much less lazy than how I actually think of myself. When I hear all that, I guess I do some stuff.
Look, if you work long enough, things pile up.
Yeah. And then I also like that you said, and more interestingly, Shane does comedy about science. I mean, as a scientist, more interestingly for you, not for everybody.
No,
some people would be like, and less interestingly, he does comedy about science. I really had stand-up comedy just way too popular. You know, I had to throw science in there just to make it a little harder on myself.
Yeah, it's there's not many people living in that little sliver of the Venn diagram between science and comedy.
Yeah.
I'm living there too.
Yeah,
which is why we're friends.
Out there.
You are now in very good company, Shane, because I've only had a handful of guests break the rules of the podcast.
Oh.
Yes. So you're in the same company as Jen O'Donnell, Neil Brennan, and Jimmy Carr.
Oh, those are great people. That's good company to be a part of. Well, how did I break the rules?
So most people wait for me to ask a question. And those three just jumped on in.
Yeah. I saw an opportunity
before the question came. I'm going to still ask you my traditional question, but I do have a rule-breaking question coming up. So if you weren't working as a comedian, what would you be doing with your life?
Crane operator.
I'm laughing because that might be true.
That is true. I mean, I think that driving forklift was, until comedy, the best job that I ever had.
Okay.
I didn't do it that much, but I did a lot of factory work, and some of it involved driving a forklift and like a pallet cart or whatever. I forget what they're even called. I spent years doing it, and like working those boom trucks. You go like way up, and like the telephone. Telephone trucks have called a boom.
Oh yes, okay.
And I've driven those around a little bit. I like levers and I think being a crane operator, but I still might get into that.
Is that your fallback?
It is kind of my fallback. I mean, I love science. Absolutely. I don't think I'm cut out to be a scientist. I don't think that I am disciplined enough. And I don't think that I am, I don't think that I'm resilient enough to
deal with the rejection.
The
constant criticism.
I don't. I love the big ideas. Maybe like a philosopher, like someone that can just completely be making things up and not have to back up anything.
Comedians are more like philosophers than they are like social scientists. They often get referred to as kind of like social scientists. But the difference, I think, is that comedians don't really care about being right. They just care about being funny. And so when you don't have data, you don't ever have to worry about being wrong.
Yeah.
And that's philosophy.
Right. That's philosophy. Yeah. I mean, and I would love to go on I would love to be a part of a brainstorming session. That sort of thing I would absolutely love. I bet I'd be half decent at it too. But the actual like discipline of like following through on the studies and analyzing the data, and there's a lot of
the report.
Yeah, I don't think that I would be very good at it. I definitely have like I mean I would like to think that another career of mine would be as a scientist, but if I'm being honest with myself, no way.
You're a
crane operator.
Yeah. I know you. So because we're friends, people don't realize what you're referring to about brainstorming sessions. So one of the things that I can offer businesses is that I can come into a business and bring a bunch of people like you, very creative, divergent thinkers, and come up with ideas that the people in the business would never come up with.
Yeah, that's the sort of thing that I would love to be a part of.
Yeah. So just if you got a business and you have problems to solve, send me an email. I'll bring Shane and a bunch of his friends.
I get to bring my friends too. That's a lot of fun.
You need more than one.
Okay.
You want at least, I figure we probably want at least 4 comics involved in this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think, I've worked in a warehouse before, just when I was in college, just like in the summer kind of a thing. And, man, that was tough work. It wasn't, I was young, so it wasn't physically taxing, but it just, for me, was just numbing.
Oh yeah. I did a lot of working on machines, and that was like, there's some pretty clear people aren't doing well in factories. There's like a lot of, clear depression issues and stuff like that.
And drug use.
Meth use. And I had on my podcast, Here We Are, we had a guy wrote a whole book about meth use in the Appalachian region. And it's all because factory work is kind of going under in all these rural areas, and they can have a little meth that helps the day go right by, and you can work a few extra hours, put a little more money on the plate. It's a very cheap drug. And there's other factors too, tree growth and everything else. And so that's really invading the factory and the urban space now. It's sad. Although that guy was on Stand Up Science, and I went to introduce him, and I said, Stand Up Science is a show that I do that has 2 scientists and 2 comedians on the same show, and I host it. And when I went to introduce him, I go, this next guy has a book on meth use on the Appalachian Trail. That's a very different book.
You can hike a little longer.
Yeah.
Put in a few extra hours, get through the trail faster.
Yeah. Anyway,
that's really
so yeah. That's it's mind-numbing, repetitive work. But the forklift stuff was like a lot of you're constantly getting better at it, and you're in different areas of the factory, and you're
it's more varied.
It's a little more varied. I like driving. I hate flying, but I like driving a fair amount. But that's like way more fun because you get to whip around as fast as you can in these forklifts, and you get rewarded for going as fast as you can.
Oh, I see.
There, so there's a lot going on there that appeals to me.
Well, I hope it never comes to that.
I hope so too. But yeah, factory work, generally speaking, yikes.
Yeah, and it's largely going away anyways.
Yeah, fortunately.
So this is actually a good segue into to this question about rule breaking. So speaking of factory work going away, it's going away because of machines. And I think one of the really interesting things that's happening, especially in the United States, is that machines have always threatened blue-collar work more than white-collar work. And now, because of artificial intelligence, white collar work is on the chopping block, right? So you're seeing, some evidence of this. I mean, there's a lot of varied evidence of this, right? So like customer service work is increasingly be turned over to bots. And we know that like the world's best chess and Go players are losing to machines.
So are doctors trying to diagnose like lung cancer
That's right.
and stuff? They're losing to
Radiologists are going away rather quickly, and even highly specialized things like surgeons are going to start having.
Imagine going to school for 16 years after high school and all of that first section. Now you go to school for. I just had a friend that he's very, very specific specialty in eye surgery. All that, and then a bot comes in and can do it better.
And just knocks it out. A lot of basic lawyering, accounting. Like I just laugh that we have accounting students because all the basics of accounting are going to be done, automated and so on. And so what I like to say is that the people who are going to be successful in the world are going to be people who have jobs that are non-rule following work, right? And so the World Economic Forum has this like really, really interesting report about this, and I'll put it in the exhibits. But it lists like the changing.
Wait,
skills.
you put things in the exhibit. This is like what's the exhibit?
So
is
on my
afterwards on the website they can go in. You're such a hard-working, organized, conscientious individual. That's. Man,
I'm writing this down.
That's terrific. You should teach me how to do that. I've had a podcast for 4.5 years, and it's a good podcast. But
it is. You have many more people listening to your podcast than I do.
But I don't do any of that stuff that I absolutely should.
Yeah. Well, it'll be in the exhibit. I promise.
Didn't even know the word. I knew what it was when you said it, but yeah, I'm just so impressed right now.
So these skills are these are activities that they don't have a set of rules. If X, then Y. So a lot of supervising people, work that requires creativity and so on. And so one of the nice things is that comics, their jobs are the last jobs that will be taken over by AI.
Yeah. I mean, even if an AI can write a joke, unless we give them genitals, what are they going to be? What are they going to be joking about? Yeah. And
we know this because computer scientists use jokes as like the holy grail of these computer programs. Like
really,
yeah. There's all these.
That's really the holy grail.
Like in my opinion, it is the highest standard. Can you, right? The Turing test stuff, right? So there are as we know, these chatbots can pass the Turing test nowadays. But creating something that can create comedy is very difficult, and boy, are they trying, and they're failing. And it's a very difficult thing to do. So, really, comedy is about breaking rules fundamentally. Like whether it be from my perspective as a benign violation account of comedy, right? The violations come from breaking norms and rules and so on and so forth. But then also just, I think even the approach to comedy, like.
I was sorry. I just I'm a very imaginative, but yeah. And I have, as you're talking about this, I'm kind of following the trajectory of like, putting all this research into making AI funny. And there's a lot of the concerns out there with AI is you'll program it to like, get rid of spam or something like that, and then AI will make the quote unquote mental leap to be like, well, humans are the creators of spam, so I guess that's the only sure way to get rid of spam is to get rid of humans. And which doesn't really make, because if something's that smart, it's probably going to be able to overlook a misunderstanding. But I was just picturing like this out like the Singularity. looks very different if it's like that AI finally figures out how to construct really good jokes and just like insanely funny, and then we just can't stop laughing. Like, that's a different robot apocalypse than I had ever pictured before.
The nice thing about that is knowing what I know about comics and how much they enjoy having an audience laugh, at least the robots won't destroy us. They want to keep us around.
Yeah.
Like, they're not going to turn us into batteries like in the Matrix. They're just going to have us sitting around laughing at their funny jokes.
Yeah.
My opinion, this is a serious digression, but my opinion about this is, I think, of course, like, the worry is you create robots for war and law enforcement and stuff like that. And so, they're at risk for overgeneralizing, perhaps, kind of a thing. But I've had this other opinion about what would happen with AI. Is it as threatening as we think it is? And my thought is that if it gets as smart as we think that it can get, so as societies progress, what you tend to find happen is
they become more caring.
They become more caring.
Exactly.
Like, so you start caring more about the environment. You start caring more about animals. You start caring more about people unlike you, and so on. And so my question is, will AI just treat us the way we treat dogs?
Yeah.
Or how will someday, maybe, hopefully, treat chickens?
And if you look at the natural progression of any scientist, what their ultimate dream, like an animal behavior person, is to really study these behaviors outside of a lab setting, because there's all sorts of problems with it. I just had an episode recorded yesterday about prairie and meadow voles, and these meadow voles that are usually pretty promiscuous. You put them in a cage in a lab, and then they won't mate for you anymore. They hate being cooped up.
It's like grad school.
Yeah. And so yeah, you would think that they would eventually, they would want to be less invasive, if anything, to like really learn and understand as much as there is to learn and understand from all of life that exists on this earth. You'd want to like not even really be seen, and that's probably why we're living in a simulation right now.
We're not going down that rabbit hole. But look, who knows? But I'm just saying, like, it's really. It's a fanciful thing to think of as like, okay, these robots are going to turn into people killers, and
it's also such a human thing. Like these are the reason why we have war and aggression is because these are instincts that evolved over millions of years for specific goals to that environment. And if we are programming the goals into there is no. The concern is, like you said, making war drones and police, and then seeing them be out of control, because that's the goal that you're setting for them. But there's nothing inherently like why people are like, well, if once they wake up, then they'd go to war with us or be aggressive. But aggression's like that's a very human. That's a very mammal thing, and it doesn't get us very far either. It's one of our worst traits.
Yeah, and no one, is the ratio of movies in which the robots turn evil to the robots are turned good is probably like 100 to 1, right?
Yeah.
Like, what I mean? It's just, that's sort of the obvious path, just because it's part of our consciousness.
It's going to be AI, the singularity is not going to look too much different than like just us staring at our phones, like quite a bit. The only way in which, like, maybe
when you say the singularity, what are you referring to exactly?
Oh, that's the Ray Kurzweil idea of the.
I'm writing this down for the exhibits.
Yeah, that's the Moore's law of the exponential growth of so computers double in processing power every 18 months, I believe, and half the cost. And so this isn't a linear graph, and so this is exponential growth. So it has this curve, and then there's eventually a point at the curve where it's just going straight up,
limit. I get
and
it.
that's the singularity.
I see. Okay.
Once robots do that one double, where they are smarter than us, potentially there's just nothing stopping them from just like quickly, rapidly advancing, like faster than we could possibly imagine.
I see.
But yeah, I think it'll either be like we'll become kind of zombies because it'll just be like just so incredibly entertaining. Like, you know, VR stuff or whatever will just completely suck us in. Or it might be like, you know, you use all these medical AI things. We might be almost like slaves to ourselves. We are already kind of are slaves to ourselves and are slaves to our genes already. But there might be like once you start implementing some of these, once your toilet is your doctor, and every time you're going to the bathroom, it's giving you some reading and telling you what you need to change in your diet and this and that, and you should run at this time and you'll feel better, and you're wearing all of these things. You'd kind of be crazy not to be following these instructions after a while, and we might eventually just be mindlessly following like these strict like medical instructions so that we can live feel good for you know 100-year lifespan or whatever it will be. So either way, I think the kind of singularity, the robot takeover, whatever is going to be way more boring or way more fun than people, other than the transition of like, what do people do when they're losing all their jobs in the meantime? It's like the self-driving car thing, like having all self-driving cars on the road, having all cars on the road be self-driving is not that hard to do. Having the transition of like having half the cars be self-driving cars and half the cars not, is that you have to manufacture a self-driving car that's so much better than it would need to be if all the cars were self-driving, because now it's having to calculate other human errors into it all of the time. And so that's going to be a brutal transition with figuring out like minimum livable wage or whatever it might be, and what is our new incentive structure look like. I think that's going to be just like a rough patch that will hopefully just be ripped off like a Band-Aid at some point, and we'll all be working like 25-hour weeks, and that'll be considered full-time or something. It'll transition in that way is my hope.
Yeah, I think what'll probably end up happening more is that you'll get this polarization. Well, there'll be large swaths of people who are doing no work, and then other people who still are doing valuable work. That'll be the painful transition. Is my guess, right? Like to this point, like, you know, comedians will still have a job, right, in a sense, because that's very difficult to replicate. Whereas like Uber drivers won't. Yeah, and I mean, I think even though they get paid the same amount right now. right, absolutely. Well, most comedians are Uber drivers. I think that, you know, humanity's always had a fair amount of dead weight attached to it, and it's just something we're going to have to come to terms with. Ant colonies have all sorts of like some crazy percentage of ants don't do any of the work, like 20% or something, like never work a day in their lives. So this happens in a lot of social colonies. There's always going to be some hangers-ons and stuff like that. But it's, I mean, I live outside Portland. In Oregon, they have a job creation program, which is you can't pump your own gas. So now you show up, you gotta wait for this idiot to get over here, and it's a whole thing. New Jersey has that too.
Inclined to tip them, and like you're waiting. It's like, come on, like I can do all of this so much faster. I'd prefer to do it on my own, and now I'm paying more for my gas and tipping this person that I wish wasn't there because of this job creation. Like I wish they were at home doing nothing instead of in my way and making my gas more expensive.
How libertarian is you.
So we're getting real political all of a sudden on this. I'm sorry. Ask your questions, Pete. And also, I don't mean to tell you how to run your podcast.
You do have a lot more experience than I do.
This is a fun conversation so far. We're hitting on some of my favorite topics.
So I am curious. So back to this rule breaking idea.
Yeah.
Right. So I think your strength as a comic is your joke writing.
I'd agree with that.
And
I've gotten to be a pretty darn good storyteller as well, actually. But yeah.
But your primary strength, I would say. So, but do you have like a system, like, you know what I mean? Like, can you articulate an approach? I mean, look, I realize you have some natural instincts that are better than most people, and you probably have had them for a long time. Yeah. But do you have a more formalized approach in terms of it?
I remember when I started, it's almost better for me to just like go back to the origins of because when I was really like a late night kind of joke writer, like trying to get the perfect 5 minutes together and tighten everything up, I used to record all of my jokes. I used to time exactly how far away. I don't do any of that shit anymore, but I used to time how far away each punchline was. I would like rate the level of the laugh that each beat got and calculate like how long the setups were. And especially with the timing, math was the only thing that I was ever good at in school. And it just felt so like mathematical and formulaic to me in this way. It's not anything you can, maybe they will be able to with AI eventually, but if you look at my writing pad, it's not a bunch of numbers and things, but it has a math quality to it when I'm writing jokes. And I think that I just kind of look for natural opportunities as much as possible. So I try to, number one, I try to write what I'm interested in writing, or sometimes just free write, which is like utter nonsense and for a while, just to kind of get the juice flowing. But I usually will free write the thing that I'm interested in, and I really make a point to not attempt to be funny. I'm not sitting down to write jokes right now. I'm just writing. And then after that, I go through and I look for opportunities of just like little twists that you can put on things. And a really easy and great way to do that, I think, is just kind of setting, is just, you have a page with multiple paragraphs, just taking it line by line and
how can you twist
putting
an
a space
idea
in there and like, how can I make this one sentence funny? Maybe you can't. And then you move to the next sentence, or breaking sentences in half and finding out, like, anytime you're presenting a fact about yourself or giving a little bit of information, there should be like a little bit of a opportunity, like a line popping into my head is about how, I'm not into horoscopes. Of course, I'm a Gemini, so I'm skeptical by nature.
Right.
And that's really just like, it was a part of my act when I was like going to say something critical about it. Like, I was setting up that I was a skeptical person, and within the setup, I was just like, oh, how can I,
here's an easy joke.
How can I put this? Yeah. It's just a little opportunity. And so those aren't necessarily always like the biggest, grandest joke, but that's a good way to like get the laughs along the way that you'll need to really get to like the really big payoffs. A lot of times for me, the hugely funny big payoff things are unfortunately a lot of like a waiting game for things to just pop into my into my head.
Because like, okay, so here's an example of something that seems like it popped into your head. So I sometimes ask you to give me a hand being funny, punch something up, and so I have this talk, shtick to business, that I've given it at Stand Up Science.
It's a great talk.
It's a crowd pleaser. It's certainly the best business talk I've ever designed. And because
I've shared it with people in conversations outside of Stand Up Science. I've shared a little take on things.
Yeah, so it has like a 1-2 punch. It's entertaining, and it has like a very clear takeaway, a useful thing for everyday people, I think.
And you just get to play other comedians,
Yes.
funny jokes as well. That is something like
Cheap.
It's a little cheap being someone who's a huge fan of science and loves watching lectures and stuff like that. Whenever I do see a scientist, which is pretty often, just using like some other comics jokes, I'm like, son of a bitch. Like I wish I could be like Chris Rock said, like, but
I do
anyway.
attribute, they do get credit. For
Right. Of
Yes.
course.
So, so there's this, one of the lessons is about the reversal. So it's a very common comedy technique. And then but reversals are useful in business and in a variety of professional settings, et cetera. And so I talk about clicks to bricks. So I talk about these internet retailers who are starting to open retail stores, brick and mortar stores, even in the same category that they've put brick and mortar stores out of business. So, for example, Amazon opening up bookstores as an example of a reversal right there. And I remember telling you about this, and then you just quickly were like, "Oh, all right, I got one for you." Do you remember the?
Yeah. It'd be like, what if Netflix had like a store that you could go to and like rent DVDs from?
That's right.
Yeah.
And you gave me this critical line that I enjoy. I don't actually like making fun of millennials very much, but it's still a fun thing where I go, it's like, all right, let's not get carried away. Like, I'm sure there's a millennial in the audience right now thinking, and then having
I mean, that's a different kind of device. So there's all sorts of, I wish I should just make a list of these and then use them in my own writing, because certainly once you have the thing that you care about saying, and which is what I do now, is I do comedy about things that I care about. That wasn't always the case. But I find it's a much more natural form. Then go through and you find things like that, and then you go like, what's next? I mean, that's
I see.
The what's next formula is a very common kind of, I mean, we're talking about this with AI, and I'm picturing the kind of inevitable outcome of following this idea to its natural, ridiculous conclusion. I mean, politicians do this all of the time with like, well, they're going to take this away, next they're going to be coming for this and that. Yeah. And
improvisers have this saying, if this is true, what else is true? So that's a improv, and I wouldn't call it rule, but it's a perspective that improvisers have.
So you can be like, in terms of reversals, another easy one is like, what's the good news or what's the bad news? Like if you're saying a depressing or negative, like I have. This isn't my strongest joke. I'll just say that, but it's a perfect example. If global warming predictions are come true, the sea levels could rise so high that it'd wipe out the entire state of Florida. And then there's some bad news,
right?
So it's like you're
the
taking
liberal audiences really love that one.
Yeah, I mean, come on, who likes Florida?
Do you tell that joke when you're in Florida?
I haven't. I mean, I've probably told that joke like 5 times.
I see.
I just do it during stand-up science when I have a climate person on, which isn't all that often.
I see.
But so that's the structure there is you have this negative news. What's the silver lining? Yes. Or if you have the positive thing, then you go like, well, what's the downside of this? It's a very easy reversal to look at in things. And I mean, that's a really common comedic tool.
And, I think what happens is that these things are, I think like, look, there is some natural instinct, to comedy. That some people are just better at doing this naturally. And then probably what happens is even if you do think about these things, they just become automatic. You're not going if then, right? You just naturally go to these places in the way that someone who's less funny doesn't.
Yeah. I wouldn't say it was that natural for me early on.
I see.
I think that had some natural inclination, but I also at the same time I would walk myself through a lot of these and really dissect things and analyze them. Whereas now it's pretty it is very natural and genuine.
I mean, exaggeration.
I don't know that I'm more or less prolific now. So it's so
exaggeration is one I've heard comics talk about a lot, right?
Yeah.
It's just how do you take this little thing and make it enormous, so to speak, right? That's one. Do others come to mind that?
Let's see. I mean, oftentimes just, understatement
is
an overstatement
way,
of
right.
taking like these really vile things or disturbing acts and then adding an understatement or doing the opposite. I remember early on I had like some joke about how I'd read about some like sex move called like the Canadian pipeline or something, which has to do with like frozen basically. And I was like, call me old fashioned, but that one seems weird to me. Yeah. And it's like, so you're taking this like ridiculously vulgar, I'm embarrassed that I'm even talking about it right now. And then like putting this like cute little charming kind of thing on it. And then you can do the reverse of that as well. I mean, you talk about, comedians like Seinfeld doing that in your book, the Humor Code, where I love that book, the Humor Code. But it's true. It's then you're doing the exact opposite. Instead of understating, you're overstating.
Yeah, yes, that's right.
This really
the
small,
Seinfeld strategy,
thing.
Pointing out what's wrong with the normal kind of a thing. I was thinking about this. So when for the Humor Code, I got up and did stand up at the Just for Laughs festival in Montreal, and it was super intimidating because I wasn't well prepared. But there was a joke you helped me with that I think is that if this is true, what else is true, or what's next, kind of thing. And it goes. We were talking about Joel Warner, who was my co-author, and I going to Osaka, and Osaka's this really amazing. It's a comedic city. It's the funniest city in Japan. In Osaka, if you walk up to someone and you point your finger at them like it's a gun and you go bang, they'll act like they've been shot, right? They'll hold their chest and so on. It's like a normal thing.
Yeah, I remember
Osaka.
this.
Nowhere else, but in Osaka, it's a thing. And the joke was you can go in and rob banks.
The world's funniest bank heist.
Right, so you just walk into a bank with your fingers ablazing.
Well, that's almost like the robots taking over through laughter, sort of a similar strategy.
Yes, that's right. And then I think you helped me with the tag, which was that you going to put the money in these imaginary bags. The tag on that joke. So you mentioned writing. Like, do you have a writing practice? Like, do you have a set way? Like,
well. When I'm writing well and when I'm focused on writing, I would say that a great thing, if I'm like, Shane, here's what you're gonna do tomorrow to show that
your ideal writing practice.
My ideal writing practice would be to wake up in the morning and there's a program called Write or Die that is
I've heard about this. It's like if you stop writing, it starts deleting what you wrote or something.
You put in the criteria that the parameters. You enter in the parameters that you want to write for. Say, I would often put in 20 to 25 minutes at 30 words a minute. That's not like insanely fast, but it's. I
type like 30 words a minute, so I know about how fast it is.
You can't stop writing at that speed, and you set that, or even at 20 if you don't want to put that. Whatever you set, whatever parameter you want, you hit start, and it's just your regular old Word document. Except when you fall below that pace, alarms start going off. The screen starts turning red and beeping at you, spiders fall on the screen. You can do all of these. And the first 10 minutes of it is usually just like, I have nothing to say. I'm just trying to get this stupid thing to stop being an alarm. What is the point of any of this? For about 10 minutes. And then after that, a lot of that resistance kind of gets broken up, and it's a little more free form writing. And not that you'll necessarily get anything out of that, although you certainly can. But I would say the first 10 minutes is usually garbage. And then 10 minutes after that can be okay. But the main thing is that just really gets the writing juices going. And then journaling at the end of the day. So I would say if you're just doing 20 minutes at the start of the day and 20 minutes at the end of the day, no matter what, then all through the day, you'll just naturally be writing more. You'll naturally be coming up with more ideas that you'll have the inclination to jot down and expand on. And it's like less, you're not really trying. You're not like, I gotta sit down and write for 4 hours. It just comes out pretty naturally. So yeah. And that's kind of juices flowing in the beginning of the day. And then you're living your life like you want to have something to say about it at something interesting to say about it at the end of the day. So that's interesting.
I use this thing called Freedom App, which blocks out the internet basically. So it's designed it doesn't incentivize writing, but it disincentivizes distraction. So it basically allows you to you can't surf the web and check your email and stuff like that kind of thing during it. It's interesting hearing that idea, because I would say my strength as a writer is my consistency. Like I get up every day and write in the morning. My weakness as a writer is that I'm often too critical and too editorial, I'm too editing focused.
Oh yeah.
So I don't do a lot of like that shitty first drafts, first writing, just all I'm doing is getting ideas on the paper. My tendency is I write a sentence and then I fix the sentence, and then I start writing another sentence, and then I do that until I have a paragraph, and then I fix the paragraph. Like,
oh yeah, that's not at all how I write.
Yeah, which by the way, I like to do. Like, to me, editing is about solving puzzles. It can be fun.
Yeah.
But it's not a great way always to get ideas.
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal scenario, I go back through, say, the second half of that write or die thing and go through it and read before and look for those opportunities and expand on them, and go through old notes and stuff like that and expand on things that I think are funny. But I'm still pretty editor free for like the first early parts, and then I would have a little more strict editing process after that. And that's always, so the editing's the last step for me. And that's the thing that I often don't even get to. I have so many pages of stuff that I have never looked at. I have so many notebooks that I've never once like looked back at or anything ever again. And so for me, it's just about kind of creating all of the time. I'm much more, I'm not a big finisher. I like starting things. I love chasing new ideas. I love like my big fix in life is like the epiphany. Whenever I feel like I've had an epiphany or read something that's kind of mind blowing, that feeling is the single greatest feeling in the world. And
that moment of insight.
The rest of my life is just kind of slugging it out, like waiting for the next one of those to occur. And I also recommend the Pomodoro technique quite a bit. That's a big increase in both productivity and creativity in the same.
So that's a 25-minute bout of creative work.
Yeah, I usually set my alarm for, and this I do pretty consistently, 20 I set an alarm for 20 minutes and 30 minutes. At 20, I have to go until the 20-minute alarm, and I have to have stopped by the 30-minute alarm.
So your average is 25 minutes.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And I can stop anytime I want to after the 20 minutes, but I have to stop by the 30. And I often find myself going to the 30. And one they say that that's maximum kind of attention. Some people have up to like 45 minutes to an hour of attention. I don't. But the other aspect of it for someone like me who is not necessarily a self-starter is that 20 minutes seems like a very small bite out of life, and it seems very unintimidating. But the real important stuff, and I do it as someone who, like, I joke about being lazy and stuff, but often I'll get to that 30-minute mark and I'm just like, I'm just going to keep on working. And I find that it is that the setting, then you set the alarm for 5 minutes to 10 minutes and take a break and like get your mind off of it. And that really makes all the difference in the world. It's counterintuitive when you're in the groove and you're working to fall out of it. But if you're doing something like creative writing, going to wash the dishes or stretch a little bit and trying to get your mind off of it in some way. Maybe TV isn't necessarily the best way, but
go for a walk or take a shower.
But that's when those epiphanies are going to come. That's what you're doing everything for. Usually that's where the gold is in the breaks.
So I'm going to make an observation as a good friend of yours who cares. I think you should stop saying you're lazy. You should stop saying it.
I am a little hard on myself, and you're not supposed to. You're supposed to be like, I'm experiencing laziness at the moment, like from a meditative.
There's the problem. Here's a technique, right? Here's a comedic technique is self-deprecation.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's like this tendency just to make fun of yourself in general. And I'm sure there have been times in your life where you were lazy, but like, you're not a lazy guy.
Yeah. I mean, I sometimes get burnt out and I procrastinate, but
that's fair.
But yeah.
but look at this list of credits.
Yeah.
Right. You've been on late night. You have a Netflix special. You have multiple albums. You've toured the world. You've got this podcast. You've got this show. You have a documentary. Like, dude,
I have a lot of hours of material that haven't been recorded yet.
You are not lazy. You should stop saying you're lazy. I say that as someone who cares about you.
Well, I appreciate that.
And if you were lazy, I wouldn't be saying this. I'm not going to falsely pump you up.
Well, I appreciate that, friend.
I just think, look, I think these things matter.
Yeah.
Like, I will say this, like, I became more creative when I started referring to myself as a creative person. I think the way you think about yourself and the way you behave, those things interact with each other while you're laughing.
Well, no, I'm just reflecting on, I had like 2 weeks ago, I had a stand-up science where someone was talking about kind of the fake news and how, all of the studies where you repeat some like made up fact to some people a couple times and then they believe it. And
the more you hear something, the more likely you're going to believe it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it also had to do with what do they call it? Like the false memory stuff.
Yes.
And gets started really fantastic, interesting studies. And, in the Q&A, we were kind of talking about like, well, I think even a audience member brought up the question, like, can you do this in like these positive mantras about yourself? Like say these positive things about yourself until
intentions,
you believe them. And, I was like, that makes all sorts of sense. And then I think the academics said that probably as well. And certainly it seems like a pretty logical leap to make. And so the next morning I woke up, I looked in the mirror, I did these stupid fucking mantras and like told myself that I'm like capable and smart and funny and like, and all of these things. And, went out that night, had the worst show of the tour.
Look, I get it. You know what I mean? I've motivation's difficult. I've actually stopped using motivational techniques largely. Like I think it's all of this is about habits. I mean, that's the secret sauce. That said, like, look, a little bit of false modesty is fine, but
Oh yeah, I'm pretty hard on myself. I always have been.
Let's keep moving because the audience is just like, all right, these two guys. I want to. This is a little bit offbeat.
Yeah.
You don't strike me as a comic who has hecklers often.
No, and I have no patience for it.
So I'm curious, when you do, on the rare occasion you have a heckler, how do you deal with it?
Well, every situation is different. I mean, usually, so like, this is people often want to know, like, what happens with hecklers? And the truth of the matter is, first of all, that doesn't happen very often to anybody.
Yes.
The much bigger concern, and this isn't like me being like, oh, I'm so good I don't get it. I'm saying, like, even when someone's doing poorly, rarely do people actually heckle.
People are surprisingly polite.
A much bigger issue in comedy is people like getting on their cell phones thinking that like they don't even mean anything by it. They're just like checking in on their babysitter or something and texting and they don't even, it didn't even occur to them that this is like a potentially rude thing or disruptive thing or distracting. Yes. And table talk can be the same thing. Those are much, much, much bigger issues. Hecklers, I mean, good luck to you, heckler. I mean, you're gonna have a rough go at it.
Yeah,
I mean, it's common. Like, we've been doing this for, I've been doing comedy for 15 years and have a lot more experience than most comics that have been doing it for 15 years because I got moved along really quickly. So I've been I've been headlining shows for 13 years.
Yeah, it usually takes people a long time to get to that point.
Yeah, so maybe people 15 years in have maybe been just starting to kind of headline shows. And so, I mean, good luck to you. Like, I'm probably going to shut you down. Like, I'm probably going to make a fool out of you. But, I mean, it just doesn't happen that. I would like to, like, I would prefer heckling, like, gives me a chance, at least. I would prefer that to just your general, like, table talk. And
how do you deal with table talk and people checking their phones?
I don't very well. It's one of my biggest flaws as a comedian is I can, like, get a little hot-headed and like, I mean, here's what'll often happen is, like, there'll be someone in the front who's disruptive, too drunk, being obnoxious, whatever it might be. Sometimes, someone will be like completely turned around, like their back is facing you, and they're like talking to their friends or something, like through a show, and I'll be on stage, and what the rest of the audience doesn't know is that I was watching the show ahead of time. The host already made comments about this person.
I see.
The feature already made comments about this person. I know this person's going to be an issue already. I already walk up there. I already have it in for this person. I already know they're going to be a problem. And I try to give like some I try to like just tell my jokes, like just looking at them. So they like need to look at me and pay attention. And so they know like I'm watching them. And that's pretty subtle. And then, 15 minutes of that goes by, and then I'm like, hey, it's just, it's kind of distracting the people around. Sometimes I'll stop the show and I'll be like, I'm not looking at anyone in particular. It's just, there's a couple people in here that are disrupting. I don't like stopping the show, but I've heard some other people shushing And like once other people are shushing, now it's like a whole thing. And like, I'm concerned about all of the people that paid for tickets, not just like one or two individuals that are being disruptive. And, and so now I've said like 5 like subtle things, and then and this person's just not getting it, and then I just fucking lose it. And so because all of those things that happened were so subtle, and people in the back of the room, they aren't hearing or seeing any of this like I just look like a fucking lunatic.
Yes,
all of a sudden that just like lost their mind, like and just snapped out of nowhere at this person over nothing. And so I would say that's one of the hardest things. I mean, it's not a big deal at my stand-up science show. I don't really have to worry about that stuff.
The audiences
like,
are so into it.
They're so into it. Like my good trip tour that I toured around with, that was people were super into that show as well. And that was the biggest problem, was people wanting to record the show because they liked it so much. They want to show it to their friends. And, that's an awkward thing because you can't have people doing that.
That's right.
And so, I'm trying to create an environment where I don't have to, a lot of people have never been to a comedy show before. They don't know the proper etiquette. They think this, it's their birthday or bachelorette party. The night's all about them. No one else in the world exists. They're too drunk. And comedy clubs are, they'll wear you down. There's a lot of shitty comedy clubs out there. There's a lot of them that like don't pay attention to curating a good audience and just want to make a quick buck by papering the room. And it's
papering the room,
a short-sighted business practice where you give out a bunch of free tickets.
Oh, then sell people drinks. I see.
And sell people drinks, and then they don't have the vested interest. And so there's a lot of things around that like really, all of that should be on the clubs and it shouldn't be happening from Jump Street. And after, like, you get rid of that, like, your one heckle that you're going to get, that's like 1 out of 20 shows, maybe, that someone's going to heckle. Usually, if someone does say something, like, it's worse when someone says something, like, trying to be funny, trying to, like, help you.
I see.
And you couldn't quite hear what they said either. And it's like, and it's kind of like, maybe it makes sense to them, but it doesn't make sense to you, or that sort of thing. And it's just like, I don't know what to do with that. You just shouted like a weird random sounding thing to me. And now because the funny thing is, you go, oh, what's that? What did you say? And then they're like, then they shut down and they won't tell you, because then now the spotlight's on them.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's like, no, I'm not mad. I just honestly want to know like what you said. So that happens and is awkward. But yeah, the cliche of like wherever 80s came, like movies about like 80s stand-up comedy or something like that, where this idea of hecklers came from, I don't think that exists anymore.
See. That's interesting. So I want to ask you a couple other quick questions, and we'll draw this down. So, you've talked about this pivot that you made in your career. Like, you started off as a kind of standard late night comic, doing, you did some off-color type stuff, like in the vein of
a lot of my stuff that worked really well for me early on was I had kind of like this sweet, innocent Midwestern face. And so I could kind of like say these outrageous things and say them in like a aw shucksy.
Yeah, this is the Silverman technique.
Yeah, and I did it really well.
Right.
And my jokes were much more mechanical. They were like, and I was much more of an absurdist comedian. Definitely, my favorite jokes were absolutely just like really absurd. Like,
what's an example?
I don't remember how the joke goes, but the premise is that if I ever heard someone breaking into my house, I would just try to pretend like I was also breaking into that house at that same time. And that's just like this very silly, absurd self-defense idea. So that's a good example of being like, I used to like this is actually an important comedy lesson.
Okay.
I had this, I think you're going to find this fascinating, actually. So I had this joke. Honestly, you could like do a study on this. So I had this really weird joke. It was actually from, speaking of futurists, it was inspired by Michio Kaku, who is a physicist who writes all of these kind of futurist-ish books, like the The Physics of the Impossible is a really good book of his. And it breaks down like, here's where we are right now in terms of taking all these sci-fi ideas, like say invisibility. And here's where we are right now. We have camouflage. Here's like where the future of camouflage is heading. Here's what's going to happen in the next 100 years. Here's what's possible according to the laws of physics as we know them, which like time travel is one of those that maybe, and then, so that was like where the cutoff was into the stage 3, which is as far as we know, this isn't physically possible, like perpetual motion machine or something. And breaks all these down. Well, within that, he had this idea of getting a sex change, going back in time and impregnating yourself. And I ran with that idea in a joke.
Why am I not surprised?
And it was this joke that, I think was really well done. It was really weird and like potentially offensive and stuff and edgy-ish. And, it was mostly a miss joke. Like comics would like it. It was too weird for most audiences. People would be looking at each other like, what's this guy talking about? But I knew it was funny. And when other comics like a joke, either that means it's just like revolting, or but this wasn't the case. It was definitely like a structurally sound. And so anyhow, I go to record my first album, and I had 4 shows to do it. The first show, got it, perfect. That's an album. Second show, wow, even better. Who could believe it? Second show Friday night is a good show. That never happens. First show the following day, I'm like so relaxed. Even better. So then I got hammered because I'm like, I already got the album recorded. I'm just going to get loose and just like, maybe I'll do some bonus stuff or something like other material that I haven't been doing. Through that
gravy.
Threw that joke out there. I liked it like worked for the first time ever. Like it basically never worked in a club before, or not well. And it did really well for like the first time ever in a club. And I liked it enough, and it got a good enough reaction that I was like, I'm putting that in the album. Put it in the album. And every reviewer is like, if you're going to listen to one track, listen to this one joke. And the reason is because when you're in a group and something's like really just strange and weird and potentially fun, but you don't want to be the only person laughing at the really weird or gross idea or whatever. But if you're alone in your car,
yes, right,
and you can laugh at whatever you want to, it changes everything. And it's like one of the, I've made so much money off of that bit in royalties and stuff. It's because it's always played on XM radio and
people are
and everything else. And it's only done once. It's only done well once in a club ever. And it happened to be recorded, and it happened to be brave enough to put it on my first album.
We talk about this in the humor code about engineering a comedy club to maximize laughs. And one of the things you do is you keep the lights down. And so that helps with this anonymity thing. So when people are in the darkness, they feel more anonymous. And so they feel more comfortable laughing because it's harder to identify them. So obviously when you're in a car, you can't at all tell what someone's laughing at or not.
Right.
So where I was going with this idea is, so, you started off as this particular type of comic, and you've made this sort of abrupt, or maybe not abrupt, but you've made this pivot into science. And there's, like, as I was alluding to earlier, it's pretty blue ocean. There's not a lot of other people doing what you're doing.
Yeah, there's like Matt Kirshen and Andy Wood have a Probably Science podcast. Right. David Huntsberger does a lot of science. I haven't listened to his stuff in a while, but he's a very funny guy. I think he does a lot of physics jokes and stuff like that. But
yeah, there's a guy,
like a
Tim Lee.
Tim Lee does.
He was a scientist. Mm-hmm. He does like a bunch of PowerPoint related jokes, funny, crowd pleasing, type stuff, which I think is pretty fun. But in general, like, compared to what you were doing before, there are hundreds of people behaving like that, so to speak, competing for stage time, et cetera. And so, to me, of course, like when you're doing blue ocean, it's harder in one sense because you're doing very new, you're creating stuff that doesn't exist. There's no formula and so on. On the other hand, it's easier, right? Because there's less competition. And if you do it well, you can have an audience that you're the only person they can turn to for this, which I think we see with stand-up science. Was this a well thought out decision? Like, did you sit down one day and go, this is not working, I need to do something different? Or did you just find yourself drifting?
It was more of a drift, because things were working at the time.
I see.
Things were working maybe better than they are. Like, my career was looking pretty good at the time I started having these ideas. But part of it, there were several things early on. One, I started traveling internationally, and internationally they do, and I was like, I want to do that more often. And I was like, how do I do that? Well, they have like this Edinburgh and all these festivals where people do these solo shows, and I'd never considered doing a solo show before. Part of this was like me wanting to challenge myself to get out of my comfort zone. I had already, when I started headlining, my jokes worked really well for 30 minutes, and then people got too used to my rhythm, and so I'd throw in a story here and there to like break it up. So then and then I focused on storytelling for a while. I sing in my act now because it's like one of my biggest fears in life is singing in front of people. So I've always like tried to. When I first started out, I could barely talk into the microphone. I was horribly nervous, and that's why I was had a dry kind of Stephen Wright-ish disposition early on. But I was getting looser, and I wanted to do themed things. I remember I had all these jokes about time travel in my act, and it had never occurred to me that I did have that many jokes about time travel until I started thinking about what a themed thing would be. And then I tried to put together a show about time travel, turned into like, maybe I should make one about physics instead and have it be more broad. And I was just doing a lot of research.
You eventually landed on evolution and dating and mating, right? Mating.
Yeah. That was, so this was in my head, and I went, there was a lot of, I caught breaks, and I wanted to now I had a voice, and I wanted to be saying more important things. I had a religious upbringing that I was pretty angsty about still at the time. And when I started really learning more about evolution, I was like, oh, no one knows about evolution. People either believe evolution or they don't. But even if people that believe in evolution, they actually don't know how it works. They don't really understand it like this. And I was like, that's what people just need. If people just heard how it works better, maybe that they would understand the impact it has on our lives. And I became obsessed with this idea. At the same time, I had just gotten through I went through this horrible breakup, was in this new relationship, having all this fun, exciting sex, was writing a lot of relationship jokes, was watching a lot of Animal Planet stuff at the time. I was writing a lot of relationship jokes and a lot of animal jokes at the same time. And then I was like, oh, this could be like a science of sex kind of a show or something. And so I started looking into what that would look like, which got me really into evolutionary psychology and biology. And it was just kind of naturally, it was like my whole career trajectory is just like a stretched out, Wikipedia wormhole that you get into, and like you keep on clicking like one link into another link, and like, oh, well, that's surprisingly interesting. Oh, okay. Oh, that's really interesting. And that's where it went, and there was a lot of pressure on me at the time to like create a TV show or something like that, which I didn't really want to do. And so it was really just to appease my management at the time. And then I looked at it and I was like, there is like I've already done like the edgiest abortion jokes or whatever. And I'm like kind of bored with like, oh, how can I make, like, what's the most vile thing you can think of? Okay, genocide. How do we make genocide funny? And like, this is just like this formula of like, think of this revolting thing, try to make it funny. And, which Louis C.K. did pretty successfully until recently.
Yes. And I always talk about it's difficult to out Louis C.K.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that was part of when I started and when I was doing that. Yeah, Sarah Silverman was doing a similar thing, and Sarah Silverman was getting pretty popular, but no one knew who Louis C.K. was at the time, even though he was writing some stuff and working with Chris Rock. Daniel Tosh was an unknown. He had just released his first album, which is fantastic, by the way. One of the best opening jokes I've ever heard in my entire life is on Daniel Tosh's first album. And Anthony Jeselnik, I was ahead of Anthony Jeselnik. I had like caught my breaks and stuff before him, but then he was starting to like get a name for himself.
These guys are all in the same vein in a sense.
And Doug Stanhope was this like, comics liked him, but like, well, too bad that guy's burnt every single bridge in the business and is never going to go anywhere. Skip forward 5 years, all these guys are like the heads of comedy, and like Bill Burr is now taking off and all this, and I'm like, well, people already know them, they're already doing this better than I am, and I'm not, they kind of have the market cornered.
And you're getting bored.
And I'm getting bored with it at the same time. Yeah. And I was just becoming, I was like now 30, less of an angry person, of like wanting to yell at people for how stupid their beliefs are, and a little more interested in just like educating people and like sharing interesting ideas rather than just being like, you're stupid. And so, yeah, I went through like for a while, I thought maybe I'd be a political comedian as well. I'm really happy I didn't talk about Oversaturated.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's how I kind of stumbled down the like evolutionary psychology and biology. At first was like half interest, half like, well, here's like an angle, that for like a TV show that I can sell. But like once I really started learning about it, it just completely changed the way that I saw the world and changed the way that I thought, and it made me I think I was naturally set up to be a pretty critical thinker anyway, and then my brain just really ran with it, and it just blew open the way that and then it was just such a natural progression to get into like behavioral economics and all of these other things, and all this just like, I mean, evolutionary psychology, which was like my first love, has just endless holes in it. If you're only looking at things from an evolutionary psychology point of view, you're missing out on a whole lot, and you're really probably doing. And so I learned that over time. Like I just kind of figured things out on my own, but I was like, oh, now I need to learn about neuroscience. And then it just became this never-ending thing, and that's when we met.
Yeah, and just to wrap this up, you talk about in Stand Up Science that you started, speaking of breaking rules, you started emailing scientists. Right? Like their email addresses are on the university website. And you just email them questions. And they'd respond with very thoughtful answers. Because no one really ever does that.
Yeah, they're like, oh, this comedian that's like been on Conan and stuff like that is man, that's kind of fun.
But I think like to me that's it's just such an interesting thing, because like it's non-normative. to do that, and you did it. And then, of course, that led to here we are, right? Because you're like, oh, these people will not only answer my emails, they'll show up and talk to me for an hour.
Having the best conversations of my entire life. I mean, it was such a, when I talk about like my being kind of an angsty person, much of that was just because I always just seemed to be thinking about bigger ideas than most of the people around me, and I couldn't have these big conversations.
I can't see you in the break room at the
crouton factory.
Crouton factory, yes.
And
you're like, so suppose you had a sex change and you went back through time.
And I was always really frustrated with that. And then I met academics who were all of a sudden bigger thinkers than I, and telling me about like these deeper understandings of things than I like. Looking back, I was really kind of patting myself on the back for what a deep, intelligent thinker I was until I met academics, and I was like, some of these scientists,
some of them, not all,
some of them,
not all
out there. I was like, holy shit, this is amazing. This isn't just like, learning a couple facts about what dates in history, in American history, this and that happened.
Yes, this is different than when they teach, where they're just giving information.
And I was like, I got to record these conversations, and that was how Here We Are started.
That's great. Yeah,
and Stand Up Science is my new project, which is really just kind of a seemingly pretty natural.
It's a clear extension of this. Now the audience is in the room with you. You know what I mean? So it's great. Last question. What are you reading, watching, or listening to that really stands out? That's great. Not just good, but great.
Robert Sapolsky's book, Behave, is, I actually am embarrassed to say that I haven't I started it when it came out, and then I put it down because I had other books that I got into, but I've read all his other books. So I was like, well, I kind of already know what this book is going to say, but it's like, if you're going to read one book to learn as much about how life works as possible, and done in a fun and funny way, like, not only is he, in my opinion, maybe one of the smartest people on the entire planet, but also like has a very layman's way of expressing things, but is also really funny. Like,
oh, nice.
Robert Sapolsky is funnier than probably me, and most comedians out there, for sure. I mean, his lectures are like really, really great. And
he's not showing Chris Rock videos like I am.
He's writing his own shit. On YouTube, there's a human behavioral biology course. It's just his course at Yale. They just set up cameras that you can watch, and it will change. I've recommended it to a number of people, and lots of people have said that course has like changed their life and changed the way that they. So that is fantastic. On TV, Billions on Showtime is really good.
Fascinating show.
Yeah, see, it's like much better House of Cards, but about Wall Street. Kind of the same similar-ish idea of like this, you're getting this look inside of like how this kind of, weaselly kind of like all these different strategies and better acted and better written and everything else.
The interesting thing about Billions, I've only seen the first couple seasons. I lose interest in these series. I often think they're too long. Like, they're probably best topping out at 2 or 3 seasons typically.
You watch The Leftovers?
Not yet. No, that's come up a number of times in this. Any case, the thing I like about Billions,
I bring it up because they ended at 3 seasons.
Oh, I see.
Like when they wanted to end, not to like, let's keep the money train running. Right. They just ended in a beautiful way.
Of them. British are good at doing that. Billions reminds me a little bit of The Wire.
The Wire took me a long time to get into. It's really good, but I didn't like the first 2 seasons.
That's fair. I mean, I don't think it has aged well in terms of the...
I didn't think there was anything interesting or novel about it in the first 2 seasons until they went into things more.
I didn't have that experience. I think it's visually not interesting in the way that TV is very visually interesting today. Mm-hmm. It feels very 90s kind of, in terms of the way it's filmed. But the thing about The Wire that I found very compelling is that it's not clear who the good guys are. That both sides are flawed. Mm-hmm. And so it's not the classic Hill Street Blues, give it to them before they give it to you, where it's very clear who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. The idea, and this is true of House of Cards, as you say, in the sense that the bad guys are even more interesting than the good guys. Mm. And so they have that going for them. And so you kind of want, you have this nice tug between the two.
Yeah.
As an aside, I went to a comedy show in New York last week, and there's this, I'm going to get the name wrong, Andy Slater or something like that. He's on Billions. He's one of the hedge fund guys.
Oh, no.
What's his name?
You're thinking of, oh my gosh,
I think he's
this
Colorado
is embarrassing
guy.
because he's a friend of mine. Not like a super close friend, but oh my gosh,
I screwed up by saying
Dan Soder.
Dan Soder. Okay,
Dan
so
Soder.
I wasn't completely off.
He is also co-host of The Bonfire on Sirius XM Radio, which is the funniest radio talk show that I've heard, in our modern era.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this. He walked into the club. It was actually in the bar. It's actually just a couple episodes. Luisa Diaz was a guest, and she books that show. It's at Lucky Jack's on a Wednesday in the Lower East Side. He walks in. I was like, that looks like the dude. I mean, he has a fairly bit part. That looks like the dude from Billions.
Yeah.
He got up. He's very funny.
Oh, yeah.
And speaking of reversals, he has a bit about crying and about a good cry. And it's good comedy.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, he does fantastic impressions and stuff. I don't normally like impressions, but he does terrific ones. He does all these characters, and
that's a digression, but
Billions
made
is
me
good.
think Billions. All right, let's having you as a guest was long overdue. I'm surprised I went 50 plus episodes before you got on.
I made it. I finally made it.
Given how close we are, but thanks so much, Shane. This was a lot of
Thanks
fun.
for having me on. Yeah, it was awesome.
Good times. Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to visit petermcgraw.org for more information about our guest, show notes, and social media links. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share.